Hello, I'm Pringle Franklin, and welcome to Living on Jesus Street. Today we're coming to you from historic St. John's Chapel on the east side of Charleston, South Carolina, and we're here with Pastor Matthew Rivers. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for being here with us.
Pastor Matthew is one of those guys that when you hear him preach, the love of God just rolls right off of him, and everyone in the room feels it and gets excited.
Amen.
And it's a real joy.
Amen.
But he has a great faith story about his life, and I want you to hear it because I know a lot of you out there might not know the Lord. A lot of you might feel like your life doesn't have a purpose, or there's just nothing that excites you. You might spend your days just sitting in front of a computer watching a bunch of YouTube videos, feeling lackluster and as if your life has no meaning. Or you might be struggling with some real hardships right now and you feel like God's abandoned you and God doesn't show up in your life. And I just want you to know that if you are walking around on this earth, if you are alive, if you are breathing, God does have a purpose for you and He loves you. And you can hear a story like Pastor Matthew's story and you can understand that the same kind of thing can happen to you. So let's hear about your childhood. You grew up here in this neighborhood and in Charleston.
Yes, I did. Right of fact, right down the street. I would never think I'd be coming back to a place that I actually grew up.
Isn't that remarkable? We never know what God has planned for us. And you grew up in a single-parent home.
Yeah, my mother raised 3 children. I'm the oldest, and I have 1 brother and 1 sister. So.
And she introduced you to the church.
Yeah, my mom was definitely we have a long history of our family being at church. My grandfather built a church on Johns Island, was part of some people that built the church on Johns Island. My grandmother was involved and so on and so on. So my mom was always in church, even as a little girl.
So she was able to carry you along with her faith, and at age 8, you had this feeling that God was speaking into your heart. But then what happened?
Yeah, I mean, like everybody else, you don't know what to do at 8 years old when you have that type of experience. You know, you just think, okay, well, I've just had this experience. But for me, not just thinking, but I knew something was different about me. And I kind of tucked that away and kind of moved on with my life and did what every teenager did, you know, just had a good time and thought, okay, that's just maybe a moment.
Right. We just often put that aside, and we sort of forget about God in a way.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we want Him when we need Him.
Yes.
But we don't want Him telling us what to do.
I didn't really know God. I just knew who He was. Like you said, you know, always calling Him when you need Him, but never spending time with Him.
Well, I love what you just said, and I just want to repeat it. He didn't really know God. He knew who He was. And I think there are a lot of people in the world, in the church, who fall into that category.
Yeah.
So to bring us along a little further in the story. What happened next?
So I go off to college. My mom made sure of that. She was the one who said, you know, you got to have education. And so I finally decided to go to DeVry. And in that, you know, I had this this lifestyle where I was a lukewarm Christian. I was living the lifestyle of a sinner. And I'm telling my friends what Jesus says. So
okay,
so
all right.
I'm on both
Talking
sides
out of both sides of your mouth
right,
a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I would always tell them, hey, you know, the Lord said this, and yet I myself was living an entire different life than what I was saying to them. So that was it was an interesting thing, and I think God just kept pressing on me. I knew that there was something different about me, but yet I ran after all of the things that life said that it would offer. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be like my peers. I wanted to hang out and do what my peers did. But I still felt this strong pull on my life that God was really calling me to do something else. But again, I didn't really know how to deal with that.
Right. And, you know, if we don't have someone mentoring us and taking us along, this will happen. We don't know what to do with a call like that. So you moved to Atlanta, you started a business.
Yep.
Tell us about that.
I got into the international trade business and import-export and did that for a long time. Got a chance to travel to Europe and Asia and do business around the world. And then that business collapsed. I then had to figure out, okay, well, what's next for me? And I thought in my life that business collapsed due to things that were happening in the world. But as I look back over my life, I realized that business collapsed because it was not really what I was supposed to be doing.
Exactly. You know, it's the mercy of God. Some of the things that we go through at the time, we struggle, we cry, we pull our hair out. we look back later and it was the hand of God on your life.
Yes.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it was truly God orchestrating me back to where I needed to be at. From that point on, I had to come back to Charleston because I couldn't afford to stay in Atlanta. And it was an embarrassing time because I didn't really have all of the earthly things that I'd worked so hard for. Car was repossessed. I had no money. So, you were going through all of those things. And then shame started to come up. I didn't want people to see me catching the bus. I thought I was still too good to catch the bus. So all of those things, started to deal with me in my life. But God was still saying, I've got something for you to do.
God had to humble you.
Yes.
You took that, don't you
Yes.
think?
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
Pride was my best friend. I would say that many of the things that don't add up to what God is asking, I was a part of that type of society where I wanted all the things of life, and then God would be the last thing I would want, only when trouble came.
Well, and we all want to look good to other people and get their approval as
Yeah.
well. We want to have a car. Probably we want to have a nice car. We want to have a nice life, a good business. I mean, these are all things that, there's nothing wrong with these things, but sometimes it becomes more important to us than our relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so when that happens, sometimes he has to turn things upside down.
Yes, I think that's, for me, I would say my story is a little bit different. My mother was a single mother, and as a single mother, sometimes you struggle in raising two boys and a girl. And I remember a time when my mom didn't have the opportunity or to have the monies to pay a bill, and she was talking to me. I was young at that time, and she said, "Son, I just don't know where we're going to get the money from to pay the light bill." And this was not an uncommon story. This happens to many people, even right now. And I made a promise to myself I was never going to be in that position to do that. And I think that promise dwarfed into me wanting what the world had to offer and not looking to God to answer that. As I did with my mom. I said, "Well, Mom, you always told me to pray." And she started crying, and sure enough, she went and prayed, and that got worked out. But I took a different road. I didn't pray. I sought what the world had and what I thought the world would offer. And I think part of that drove me to the point where I decided pride and greed and all the other things to want the desires of what life would offer or what society said I should be. And it just never added up. It brought me right back to the same place, which is where I didn't want to be.
Because if we don't have a relationship, a personal relationship with God, with Christ, there's an emptiness in our heart. No matter how successful you may be, no matter what you've done or what you have achieved, there is this God-shaped vacuum within each of us.
Yeah.
And that was there. You were feeling that. So, all right, so then God calls you again. Tell us about that.
A man showed up and was sitting at Kinko's, and I walked by and I'm thinking, what is this man looking at me for? And I went inside, and he came inside and he said, "Son, I don't know you, sir, but I just wanted to tell you that the Lord said if you come work for me, then everything that you want, he'll give it to you." And I said to the man plainly, "Yeah, I go to church, thank you so much." And the man actually turned around and walked out the door, and I've never forgotten that story. He was just reminding me of the promise that he gave me at 8 years old when I was now in my late 20s and things of that nature. So it was just different. So I kept trying to do the things of the world, and those things I would be successful and then fail. And I didn't realize that God was trying to say, no matter how much you try to go in that direction, it will end up right back where you started.
Right.
And so I was watching T.D. Jakes, and at that moment, as I was going back to sleep, I heard the Lord said, "Now is the time. You've rejected me 20 years ago. Now is the time." And he said it 3 times to me, and I knew right then, okay, I got to move.
Okay, 3 times. You know what? The grace of God, he often does, when he has a message like that, he will repeat it.
Yeah.
And why does he have to repeat it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, a knucklehead like me, I guess to say, for many of us, sometimes one time is not enough.
One time is not enough. We know it's not enough. It's never enough, okay?
So it's something that I think he wanted me to understand totally that, look, I really need you right now. And I really accepted the call.
That is amazing. And that was the major turning point of your life.
Yeah, major turning point. But like anything, when you accept the call from God, is really kind of the start of the race, really. Everything else before that was on my own. Now, that yes is a costly yes. And so for anybody that have accepted the call of God, knowing that when you say yes to God, it is not going to be an easy road to travel.
It's not. And yet, what comes along with it is the joy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's
right.
true. The joy of all failures, the joy of the valley times, the joy of the mountain times. And those things are sustained by the grace of God, and as you move forward. And it can be extremely tough sometimes, because you think when I get with God, everything should be perfect.
Right.
And that's the mistake that I
Right.
think most of us make.
We do. We want it to be like that. But the thing is, we're not perfect.
Right.
We keep getting in the way. So that's where the problem is. And that mercy and that grace of God keeps coming back to us.
Yes.
And sometimes repeating. And we know his timing is perfect. So he also answered your prayer about your wanting to marry somebody, just the right person. You even were specific enough to say someone you've gone to school with.
Right.
So let's bring on your wife.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
We want you to meet Henrietta Rivers. It is exciting to see that God has given you just the right person to be your helpmate in life and in this church and in your ministry. So Henrietta, tell us about when you met this guy.
Oh boy, Matthew and I knew each other growing up. We went to elementary, middle, and high school together, so I've known him since childhood. But when a friend tried to introduce us, neither one of us were in a space that we wanted to be set up, so God did it, where he would not tell either one of us that we'd be at the same party.
Someone got sneaky. Yeah.
God got sneaky. We ended up at the same place and talked for 6 hours that night.
So there was, of course you knew each other, but you had a connection. You really reconnected. 6 hours, that's a long time.
We had a great time reconnecting, and there was something in Matthew's spirit that that resonated in my spirit that I had not found in all the years previous to that.
So when you all met, how far into your faith journey were you when Henrietta showed up on the stage of your life?
Like if you was to be honest, like most people, my faith journey was still, kind of at the beginning of it. When they talked about accepting God, for some people it is an immediate thing. For me, it was a real work that had to be done. I use the Bible as the whooping stick. Like, okay, I'm still the same person mindfully. Like, you need to do this. But I wasn't doing what I was telling her again, like I did in the world.
Right, which had been an earlier pattern for
Yes,
you with your
correct.
friends. But I think at this point, your heart was at least turned more towards the Lord,
Yes,
right? You were trying, but it's a habit of personality or a habit of mind, which
Right.
the Lord is so gracious in teaching us how to change these habits that we need to change.
Yeah.
And maybe Henrietta coming into your life was part of what you needed to change that.
No doubt.
Yeah. Because I know Henrietta is not afraid to share the truth, okay? And sometimes that's what we need.
Right.
Someone who loves us, who can share the truth. So, all right, so you met, you connected, you had a great conversation, you saw a change, more godliness in his heart. And then what happened from there?
One of the things I recognized in Matthew was that our past behaviors, past patterns were alike. And we'd both been running, not only from God, but from commitment. We'd been running from other things in life. And so that spoke to me. And I remember saying to Matthew, hey, I'm in this journey in my life where God is calling me. I am no longer running. I see you still running, but I don't want that in my life. And so it took some time before we got to the place where we were ready to walk it out. But I was at a place then that I knew it was time to not go back, not regress. And I was pushing Matthew to not regress either, because we were like-minded and I recognized that spirit in him.
What a beautiful thing. And to me, it's such a testimony of what God does. How he'll call you and you start walking in faith, but you're still, kind of weak. And then he knows, okay, I'm going to bring this person along and I'm going to bring this circumstance. He helps us so much, which he's done with you.
Yeah, I think the reality, we've been married for 7 years, but we should have been married for what?
15
years.
Right,
So let's not get it twisted out there.
Right.
It took about a good 8 years for me to sink into this thing. I think most people love to tell the greater part of the story. And for me, I want to make it very clear that, God really had to do some work on me. Even though I knew who God was, but my relationship had not really developed to the point where I understood what a helpmate would be like and what I needed to be to this helpmate. And so we had many a times when we broke up, got back together, broke up, got back together. And so the real story is that that's what people really go through in life, to try to understand, what this means. And then for most men, I just want to speak for most men, we don't understand what it is to wear that crown all the time. And I think we sometimes take that crown off and give it to our spouses, our girlfriends, only when we don't want to do the things we're supposed to do. But when we want to rule or make decisions, then we take the crown and put it back on.
When it's convenient.
When it's convenient. Let's just use that. Right? And so I think my wife had to keep trying to tell me, I really need you to lead, to teach, to pour. And that really is the story. When a good helpmate comes along, it has to be somebody who's willing to say, I see you, but I've got to play my role in helping you to get to who you are. And along with prayer, which my wife was really good at. She taught me a lot about prayer. She had to do a lot of praying for me.
Well, and in any marriage, really the ideal is that the husband and wife are wanting what's best for one another, and they're working to bring out the best, the highest good in one another, particularly if they're walking with the Lord. And this is what, is happening with you all. All right, so when did you really decide that you were going to get serious with one another? Tell us what happened.
Well, for me, it was right as soon as we met. I went to a women's retreat, and God spoke to me at Camp St. Christopher that Matthew would be my husband. And when it didn't happen, I tried to go the other way and, tell him, come see me when you're ready. And we did that for a couple of years back and forth. And in 2012, as I was navigating through a relationship, God spoke to me that Matthew was my husband. So I called Matthew and I said, hey, I'm not going to date anyone. I'm just going to wait for the manifestation of God's promise.
You told him that God had said he was your husband.
I told him that in 2006.
That's kind of bold, isn't it?
And then
that's kind of bold, ladies. I wonder about that strategy.
I did. And I even tried to run. I even thought maybe I didn't hear God right. This guy's going in a different direction.
Yeah.
But when God clearly spoke it the second time, I called Matthew. We weren't dating. And I said, God said, you're my husband, and so I'm going to wait until you get it together. And I went about my life until he got it together, and he did a year and a half later.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I really think that this is the part that I think people don't want to tell, people don't want to share, especially pastors who have been in relationships and want to say, God did this for me and my wife. My wife and I, we understand that our struggles is the reason why we can preach and teach the way that we do.
Right,
It is our past that has become history for God to use, that many people can see and say, wow, if that pastor can go through that, well, maybe what I'm going through is not as bad.
That's exactly right. And for people not to give up hope.
Correct.
God is not done with them. And I really love the fact that, Henrietta, you knew what you knew. You knew that God had spoken this to you, and you surrendered to it. And you laid it upon this man, said, okay, I'm just going to wait, And what did that feel like to you when she said that to you, when you got that?
Well, my exact words were, God didn't tell me that. I was like, oh, okay, well, great, okay.
So a year and a half goes by, and then do you reach out to her and say, now I'm ready, or what happens?
The pastor here at St. John's Chapel never accepted outside invitation to go preach. Matthew was preaching at a sister church at my former church, and I was here at St. John's Chapel. I went to this off-site preaching at Matthew's church, which it was surprising to everyone that Pastor Dallas accepted this invitation. He had stopped taking outside invitation, but because of a dear friend, he accepted it. And I did not tell him that my boo was at Faith Anointed, and we get there, and Matthew serves Pastor Dallas the whole night. He was like an armor bearer to Pastor Dallas, and when we left the church, Pastor Dallas said, I want to mentor that young man. And I said, Pastor Dallas, that's the guy that I've been telling you that God said would be my
My
husband.
The knucklehead. Right.
Wow. Oh, my word.
And so Matthew saw me that night, and then it resonated that that's my wife sitting there in a pew with some other parishioners, male and female, and he didn't know the situation, and he was like, that's my wife.
So he got a little jealous? Is that what you're saying?
That's really what it was.
Okay. You know, that works.
Yeah.
God uses
Yeah.
our human
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So ladies, a little jealousy, it won't hurt.
It won't
You know, yeah,
hurt,
it won't
you
hurt at
know.
all.
So she offered herself up.
Yeah.
He wasn't ready for it. Then he sees that, wait a minute, she's with some other people.
Right.
She's happy.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I think, you know, men don't grasp things as quickly as women do. And that's no knock on men. I think we look at things from sometimes a different perspective, and sometimes it takes us longer to process something. I was glad that I did process it.
Right.
Because I wouldn't be here today.
Right. And we're, you know, this is what's so beautiful. God knows what you need and what you need
Yeah.
and what you need, and He will set it up for us. But we still have free will.
Yes.
You know, He's never going to force anything on you. You have the freedom of choice. But when you choose Him, it always turns out to be the best thing possible.
Yeah.
Even if it's difficult.
Right.
You know, it is the right thing and it feels right. And so after you got married, you got a call to seminary for both of you.
For me, it was exciting and scary that we would have to leave what we knew. We'd both been in, well, I'd been in real estate for 15 years at this time, and leaving a career and going off with my husband to school without our son who was about to graduate high school or had just graduated high school. So it was a little difficult, but exciting at the same time. I was ready for the challenges that we would face.
Yeah, I think she probably more than me. You know, I mean, when you go off to some place, you know, you've never been, school is never a problem. Now, of course, my wife is much smarter than I am. That's the one thing. But I was much older, and I was excited about going to school. But I think for me, again, holding on to what I thought the world would provide, which is an income, got extremely scary because now I can't work. You know, I don't have the ability to work and go to school at the same time. And I think in God's own ways, He uses every circumstance to help bring about what's been buried inside you. And what was buried inside me was still the love of money. And I began to really, for the first time, experience some sort of depression, which I've never had before. I used to even talk about people with depression. I'm like, what is wrong with you, man? Would you just trust God, you know? And so God uses every circumstances. And I remember having this problem. My wife would come to me and say, what's wrong with you? You know, just trust God, you know, trust God. And so the Lord, I really had to look at my hands, and the Lord asked me, who do you trust more, you or your hands? And I had to say, God, I trust my hands more than I trust you. And so it was a challenging time. So I had to really kind of deal with that issue, and then knowing that I trust my hands more, that then drizzled down into our relationship and how we looked at money, and how my wife wanted us to, no matter what it was, really we could just trust God. And me, on the other hand, I was saying, no, I need to figure out how I can get this money and get us through. And so that was another challenge that I think affected our marriage. We were newlyweds, and so the way I looked at things and the way she looked at them, my wife was really looking at things more from a godly way. I was looking at it from a more natural way.
I think that it happens a lot with couples, you know, that the man who feels the responsibility and does tend to look at it this way, you know, and then God sends him a partner to say, well, there's this other perspective. And so you were working through this, and at some point along the way, you were struck by a serious illness. Tell us about that.
At the time.
Matthew was diagnosed then with sarcoidosis, and he managed it pretty well for about a month and a half, and then the disease started attacking his vital organs. He had a stroke in our home. And
that is so frightening.
Oh my God, it was frightening, because by the time they got him to the hospital, he was non-responsive. And so Matthew had been in ICU from this stroke, but then the sarcoid started affecting other organs, his kidneys. He was already having issues with his lungs, and so this thrombosis in his brain. I mean, it was attacking every vital organ, and they didn't expect Matthew to live. Sarcoidosis is an inflammation of the lung, and so it's a chronic illness. He still has it. It's not curable, but it's manageable, and he's in remission right now. And he's not had any regressions or any setbacks with any organ attack, but he has to be careful.
This is tremendous. So you're at the point where you're in seminary, you're newlyweds, and your husband is critically ill and might not live.
You know, this had been a year after coming to seminary. And one thing about being a believer as an adult, when you walk in faith as an adult, Matthew's been in church all of his life, me not. I came to the Lord as an adult, so I took the Lord's words literally. I believed everything it said, everything the word said, everything God said, I just believed it. And when Matthew was in ICU, I was staying in the visiting room, and the Lord spoke to me that my husband would not die. And I believed it.
You received
that.
You
it,
received
and I believed it.
Yes,
and
right.
not only did I receive and believe it, he reminded me of the struggle getting to this place, of the struggle of our journey getting to where we were. God reminded me that it wasn't for my husband to die a year later. And so I started feeling more confident that God was going to work this out. In fact, I started speaking it to all those who would come and sit with me at the hospitals. I believed it, and I declared it out of my mouth. And then the morning they were going to take the tubes out of Matthew, the Lord spoke a scripture out of Psalm that my husband would not die, that he would heal, and that he would be delivered. And I had to speak that scripture over him. I told them not to take the tubes out until I blessed his lips with the word that God had given me. Of course, they did it before I came out, but before I came in. But before Matthew spoke to me that day, I told him, you can't speak to me until I say to you the words of the Lord. And the Lord declared his healing. And so we knew that it was going to be a journey, but I knew that he would recover.
What a blessing. And being a woman of God, being a woman of prayer, being a woman of faith, this is one of the fruits of having a relationship with the Lord. That when you go to him, you know his voice. And when he speaks to you, you can recognize it.
Yes.
And you can claim it. And you're not just claiming something that you wish would happen, you're claiming what the Lord has spoken into your heart. And that is why part of why you're still here on this earth, is her protection of her faith, receiving God's word for you and speaking it out.
My husband left the hospital in 10 days, went back to school full-time, and never skipped a beat. I, on the other hand, worried the whole time, Matthew, slow down, stop doing this. But God is good. God is good.
That is tremendous. Well, then you came to St. John's 2018. Was it July 2018?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about this neighborhood where St. John's is, just a little bit about your vision for your ministry here.
Again, years ago, when I was considering this call, I said to the Lord, you know, I want a church that is as a church that represents what heaven looks like, which meaning that there will be all types of people, blacks, whites, every color, every nationality would be here. And that was kind of like I was bargaining with God. Like, you want me to be a pastor? Okay, well, here's what I want from you. So I didn't know whether God was going to honor me, because I'm trying to make God do something that if he had a different plan, it would have been different. But I said, God, I just want to make sure that I'm able to speak to every nationality. I want to be able to look out from that pulpit to see all people come together and worship in one space. If you trace the history of the church all the way back, it started with whites and blacks, and it was the second free church here. So God ultimately had already done something that years later, because I asked him this request, would honor my request in his own way of doing things. And so my thing for this church was already set in place by God.
Well, if you think about it, the way I'm responding, hearing you say that, you know, in the last year in the United States, since George Floyd, really things exploded in a way, but even prior to that, there's been such a spirit of division. And so God was raising up in this church and in your heart the antidote of that, which is unifying, that you can be diverse You can have, your different culture or different preferences, but you're still one in God's eyes.
Yeah. I think my wife has been in the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Church a long time. So she had a lot of being raised up in a mixed congregation. Where I grew up was all African American, but also, but I think where I got my ability to deal with different peoples, one, because my mother raised us up like that to always love people no matter what their skin color is, background, nationality. Then I had an opportunity to travel around the world to deal with people in their prospective places that of different races and backgrounds. So when I came here, it was always, God had already prepared my heart to deal with people of different races, different backgrounds, and even in times like this where race has been the monster in the room and sticking its ugly head out. But I think what my wife and I really kind of decided to do was to preach the love of God no matter what was happening. Right. And right. That is the real antidote for anything. We never really kind of got into the mix of, I'm black or I'm white. I think what we decided to do was to continue to preach the love of God. And justice cannot be found in the courts here on earth. It has to be found in the courts in heaven. And that's where justice reigns from. And when it reigns from heaven down to man, then real justice can start to make changes in our hearts. And
that's right. That's right. And the thing is, you are taking the love of Christ beyond the walls of this church. You go out into the community, and not even just this neighborhood. You go beyond, and you reach out to people, and you find people that feel like they've been forgotten. Mm-hmm. And that is such a gift, because God doesn't forget anyone.
Yeah.
He does not forget them. And your ministry here together is such a beautiful thing.
Well, I think I would say for me, and my wife can chime in at any time, I've always said this in my heart, and I made it known to the parishioners, that this ministry doesn't start within this gate. It starts outside of this gate. And so I consider myself to be a pastor of anybody in this region or on this earth, to be their pastor if they need it. Now, that's not to take the place of any other pastor, but I consider that my calling is not inside this gate. My calling is for the people of God.
Well,
and that's where I kind of preach from, that I'm preaching to all people, not just ones who are members of this church.
And one thing about your personality and your mindset is that you are spreading goodwill and sunshine, really, when you go. I was on the phone with Pastor Matthew this week, and he happened to be going through a drive-through to order his lunch. I think it was his lunch. And, I'm hearing him talking to the person that's taking his order. He's not just giving his order, like, this is what I want. He's cheerful, he's friendly, he's engaging with this lady that's taking his order. And by the time, he had finished, she was laughing. She could tell that her day was better because someone had actually acknowledged that, hey, you're a person, and I'm just going to share a little laugh with you, and I'm going to treat you the way I would want to be treated if I was working your job. Mm-hmm. And by the time he got his food and drove off, just the whole atmosphere between them was just so loving and so life affirming, and that's who you are. That's what God has put in you as you go around, as you say, beyond the gates of this church, spreading that. But to continue to do that, you have to have someone pouring into you, and God gave you this beautiful woman, this angel, to be there for you, right? Because we all need somebody propping us up and loving us and rubbing our feet so that we can go out and take care of others.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would like to mention about this neighborhood is when Matthew and I grew up here, this was a black community. It was not a diverse community. It was not every ethnic background. It was a black community we grew up in, and for God to bring us back to a place that is now diverse and now setting St. John's as a pillar and an example of what unity in community should be, I think it's just I'm totally always just amazed by what God does, because to be placed back in this place that has already established the vision that Pastor Matthew wanted God to fulfill, And then to go out in this community, which was once our community, which was once a black community, to go out into a black and a white community and show the love of God. It has been the most, I don't even have a word for it. It's been mind-blowing because our people, black people in this community, have not realized or known how to be in existence with their neighbors. And I think St. John's set the example of how that coexisting is to happen. And so when they come into these walls and there's this fear of sitting next to their Caucasian counterpart, they see that we're one body with one Lord. And so that's been the beauty of St. John's for me in this community, and it being totally different from what I grew up in, to be now in a place where black people could feel comfortable sitting next to a white person without it being like, that's the white person in the room,
Right.
or I'm the only black person
Right,
in the room.
exactly. It feels very loving and inviting,
Authentic, yes.
you know, and I love to come here for worship because the minute I walk in the door, I know that I am welcome. I don't in any way ever feel like, you know, why are you here, or this is awkward. It's such a welcome, loving place. And all people, I've seen people come in off the street who look like they might not have eaten for several days, and they are welcomed just as much as anyone else. I've seen people that have, you know, very successful businesses come in this door, and they are welcome. I've seen the mayor come in here and play your piano and sing. You know, I mean, all kinds of people are walking, and they're all coming in and they're receiving the love of God.
There's this unity in our community that can only happen with God being a beacon of hope, a beacon of light, and then us sharing by being the salt and light of the earth.
Well, and it's exactly what is needed today, to have people come together and celebrate the unity that we're all God's children. And in each one of you out there listening, I know this story has been encouraging to you, and I hope that you'll take a moment to get on your knees or get quiet with the Lord in whatever way is comfortable for you, and just say, God, what kind of vision do you have for my life? Because I see that you can perform miracles. You can move mountains. You can bring me to a place where I can be of service to others in a way that really makes a difference.
Yeah.
And so thank you both for sharing your
Thank you.
story and for letting us be here today with you.
Thank you.